We are committed to creating a safe and supportive space for our guests and listeners, and to provide information and tools that will help our listeners understand, manage, and overcome trauma. We understand that the healing journey can bring up challenging emotions. Therefore, we want to warn our audience that certain episodes may contain discussions or stories that could be triggering for some individuals. The content of the podcast is for educational and informative purposes only, and we encourage you to practice self-care and discretion while listening, and to reach out to a trusted support system or professional if you feel overwhelmed and need help on your healing journey. Hello and welcome back to Healing and Growing Hand in Hand podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Tickle, and our guest today is Stephanie Townsend, and she is a trauma specialist. And this is a topic that I have been trying to find somebody to talk about, because I think I discovered it and it's not out there enough, and I think that it needs to be. I think we definitely need to dive deeper into this. But we're going to talk about the similarities between the behaviors of ADHD and trauma. And I just find that so fascinating. And you had mentioned an interesting fact, and I guess it can open up and you can share your story, but that more attention goes to the children that are acting out. And that's usually boys because they're usually hyper overactive. But girls daydream. And I look back on myself, and I definitely was a daydreamer. So yeah, so why don't you tell us your story? Because that kind of is a segue into your story as to how you found that out.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. There's no shock to anyone that boys and girls are raised like societally different in any culture, but especially like in the American culture, we hear like boys will be boys and boys are just going to do what they're going to do. And girls, we tend to be a little bit more socialized to be like more nurturing and accommodating and just quiet.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not we're quiet, but we are socialized to be that way.
Right.
And so like schools, they do exactly like what they can, what they're able to, and what they're able to do is intervene on behaviors that are distracting to others. And so when you do have the boys who, get up and talk or just disrupt, or like the pencil banging on the desk, or that is more intervened because that is distracting to others, or even like the educator. But when we have our girls who are not, inflicting distraction on anyone else or bothering anyone else, but they are daydreaming or dissociating and completely like not reading like what's going on in their classroom. We often get told that we're just like not good at that subject, or we're not trying hard enough, or we don't care. And really a lot of times like we can pass tests, or we can at least orally tell you extensively a lot about the subject because we can like intake at the same time.
Right.
And so, yeah, we don't get caught early enough, or historically we haven't been diagnosed early enough. Women haven't, because we haven't been the issues, so to speak, like in the classroom. So that leads like a light, I would say like close to the majority of women, myself included, getting late diagnoses with ADHD. So we kind of just grow up thinking like, why can't I just do this thing? I'm like so avoidant to it. Why can't I focus? Why can't I manage my time better? I must just not care enough, or I'm not a good person. And really, we just have ADHD.
Right.
We also have language. Yeah.
Which is a relief when you find out that there's something to it,
Yeah.
right? Well, and I shared with you before we started that there is this little chart that I found online, and it talks about some of the behaviors of ADHD, the behaviors of trauma, and then the overlapping behaviors. This is what really blew my mind. So I'm just going to share this with the audience, and I hope we'll be able to put it up on the screen, but if not, I'll just read it real quick. But for ADHD, some of the behaviors are hyperactivity, impulsivity, forgetfulness. On the trauma side, it's like disassociations, nightmare flashbacks, sudden bursts of anger. But the common ones were agitation and irritability, disorganization, poor self-esteem, problems concentrating, which I have that one, inattention, distractions, difficulty with work, school, sleep, etc. And I can tell you that I definitely had a hard time concentrating. And mine comes from trauma. But I also could be impulsive too. And that's not necessarily on here, but I'm sure that could be one of them. But I just find that interesting that there's those overlapping. And so, I mean, do we have tests these days that can separate that? I mean, that's kind of scary because we're putting kids on ADHD medication, right? That may not need it.
So I don't think that we quite have like the test yet that can tell us like, no, this is ADHD, this is PTSD, or vice versa. I actually just took a training a couple of weeks ago, and it's funny to me that the ADHD assessments now, they specifically said that PTSD or like trauma symptoms were not used for like characteristics or identifiers like within the ADHD assessment. But then we go like down 2 more slides, and when we do the differential diagnosis, where like mental health professionals are kind of required to consider other diagnoses that could be at play, PTSD is number 1. So we don't quite have like the test, but we do have the test where it is asking for like the biopsychosocial background of like, is there trauma in this child's background? Was there something that was like really dysregulating? Was there a recent move? Was there a family dynamic that changed? So I think like that's probably the closest I could probably state like today that we have on like PTSD versus ADHD. But yeah, it's crazy to me how similar they are because they're both, dysregulated nervous systems. They just kind of have different abbreviations.
Right, right. So tell us your story because you were saying that you got diagnosed later as an adult, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as a kid, like I went through like a string of like traumatic events, and I won't say because of it, but also when I got like later into school, like middle school and high school, I always did like well in school, except for math. Math is actually, I had I had to actually take like remedial math my first year of college. I was so bad at it. And it wasn't because I was bad at it. It's because I didn't care about it because I wasn't good at it at first. So then I completely just left the scene,
It's a vicious cycle. You don't care about it, so you're not going to try, so it's not going to get better.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I spent like a lot of years like in therapy, and I would explain to like my therapist, like, I just can't seem to like make change. Like I get really excited about this one change and I'm all in, and then like I crash and burn out. And then, I hit this, what I now call the ADHD cycle with my clients of like, we get really, really excited, we deep dive in, and then something, I don't know, anything doesn't work about the change.
Mm-hmm.
And then we completely crash out.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens enough, and it happened enough with me where that starts to like really like take a toll like on like your self-worth or how you view yourself. And so I remember being like early 20s, like even in the mid 20s, just really disliking myself and parts of myself because I couldn't make change. And then I had a therapist one day like, oh, like, you're probably ADHD. Like, are you like not ADHD? I thought you were. And I was like, no, I have never been told that. And so I got like a diagnosis like when I was almost 30 years old.
Wow.
And
that's a lot of suffering.
It is. It's a lot of a change that could have been done. It's a lot of healing that could have been done a lot sooner. But yeah, like I just assumed that I just was a disorganized, lazy person, and really it's something that's diagnostic.
I know that that's the problem with ADHD is it does hit your self-esteem, and it can, and I can see why, because if you haven't been diagnosed with that, and I won't name any names in my life, but there's people in my life that one particular person, that person was not diagnosed until they were an adult either. And for that person, it did explain so much. It's not great being diagnosed with something, but at the same time, it's a relief to be able to put a name on it. And that,
absolutely,
for this person, they had struggled, and this person was at this point probably late 30s, early 40s, and had struggled their whole life with a lot of these symptoms. And it definitely wore them down. It absolutely wore them down, and their self-esteem and their self-worth and their confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, like really similar to like finding yourself in a hole, and you know that there's like a way out, but you try 47 different pathways before you like just happen across the correct one.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe if you had a flashlight or a diagnosis, there would have been like way more direct ways to get out. You wouldn't be
Right.
so exhausted. Yeah.
Right. You'd have you okay, this is what it is. Okay, so now how do I work with it? How do I manage
Mm-hmm.
it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So so do you think that your trauma had played an integral part of it, or do you think it is just the ADHD? Now, because I had Tim Fletcher on, and he talks about the big T's and the little T's when it comes to trauma. So the
Yeah.
big T's, are sexual abuse, or something
Mm-hmm.
along those lines, physical abuse. And then the little T's are just the little things that come along that are kind of repetitive sometimes, that just kind of add
Mm-hmm.
up.
Mm-hmm. Um, and this is like where I think the ADHD and PTSD is like kind of like the chicken or the egg kind of question. I
Yeah.
do believe that there are people out there like without trauma, or at least like big T trauma, that do have ADHD. And I also believe that there are people who have PTSD without ADHD. But I think for the most of us, like the general population of us who have ADHD, also have PTSD. And so I also think that like my background specifically like plays into that too, because when you look at trauma, like big T or little t, what is happening is something is being inflicted onto you that causes a dysregulated nervous system. A sense of choice was taken away from you, something that was so beyond your control. And basically, like your entire nervous system was rocked. But if you look at how people handle that, you see a lot of those ADHD symptoms like really early on within like the early signs of PTSD. What I kind of think like ADHD like can be for a lot of people is our nervous system never really could figure out a way to re-regulate like in a healthy way. I think that we can regulate, but it's not always like the healthiest way to go about it. So I do think that like my specific big T and little T traumas did or and do play a lot into like my ADHD diagnosis, because I'm 25 years removed from like some of this stuff, 15 years removed from other things, and my nervous system still gets elevated, and it just gets complicated by that ADHD,
Yeah.
because we are always looking for stimulus, always looking for like the next thing, and that can like kind of get us in like clinical trouble sometimes.
I could see it almost feeding off each other, right? Because you're going to have the ADHD symptoms that can play with your head, because it can be
Mm-hmm.
frustrating, which then causes a form of trauma and frustration. And so then you're going to have those. So it's like they almost play off each other.
It's one of the like most unfair and vicious cycles I think that we can clinically have, that's not talked about like nearly enough.
Yeah. It's because I've done research, because I reached out to on the Facebook group and found you about this subject, but I have been doing my research. There's not a lot of research out there. There are some people that have um, done studies and stuff like that, but there's just
Yeah.
not a lot out there. I was surprised, and I was pleased when I found it, because I thought, well, this is a really interesting area, and if we can get the word out there so parents can look at both options if they have a child that is showing symptoms of ADHD or trauma,
Yeah, absolutely.
there's at least it's kind of out there, but it'd be nice to have it out there and make it easier for parents to figure this out.
And I think that it is like, it's really hard to like get the answer either way. And I think it's hard to even start that conversation, because I mean, if I were to have like a parent come in and, they're like, I think my child has ADHD. And I sit here and start asking questions like, well, how have they been traumatized? I think that that's like a really,
That's
that's a
probably
really
not going
big
to go over
barrier
real
to
well.
parents. Right. And I think that like as parents though, like that can be like a really hard conversation. Not that they've like inflicted damage, but like to sit there and think about like what about our life can be dysregulating, that is regulating to me because this is how I grew up. Or, what is it that happened in mine and my child's life at the same time that I don't really feel comfortable addressing it on my own, as a parent. And I
Yeah.
think that there's just a lot of stigma, because what
Mm,
happens, right? And it's
yeah.
more, it's better that we like work with it and identify it than like running away from it. But I think that there is like a lot of stigma around it. So a lot of people just don't want to talk about it.
I know that is a big problem is mental health has a stigma still. Childhood abuse has a stigma. Trauma
Mm-hmm.
has a stigma. All of that, and we need to take that stigma away. And because it's definitely holding us back.
Yeah,
And like
absolutely.
this should be studied more. And it would be nice to be able to have something because I've talked to several experts too. And the one thing that isn't out there yet is like what exactly is abuse? What exactly is trauma?
Right.
And I had Tim Fletcher on and it was such a great interview too. And there's the ACE test, which I've taken and when I put myself in the mindset of what I used to deal with, I was a 7 on that test, 7 out of 10.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was pretty high.
Yeah, it's up there.
So, but a lot of that, and Tim explains it, is a lot of the big T, the big trauma. And so he expanded the test to 60 questions. So it can handle it brings in a lot more of the like the little T traumas that come into
Hmm.
kids' lives
Yeah.
to help them get a better view, a more comprehensive view of where they are as opposed to just 10 questions. Because like I said, I don't have it in
Absolutely.
front of me right now, but it's really interesting. But I don't know remember why I was going there because I just find that really interesting. But well, one of the things that he does with I don't even remember why I was going there. That makes me mad when I do that. It drives me crazy when I do that.
I think we're talking about like the parental stigma with just kind of like looking at childhood trauma and like defining
Right,
like what abuse is. Yeah.
right. So there's tests like that so that you can get an idea of what's going on. It would and like, that's what I was saying too. Is there's no definitive here is what this is, so that we can look
Right.
at it and understand it because you know my idea of what trauma is could be a little different for you. And so if we have just one understanding of what trauma is and what it looks like, that would be able to help people because, and that's the thing too, sitting down with parents and trying, I mean, it would be awful to sit down with a therapist and have them question me about any trauma that's happened in my kid's
Oh,
life.
sure. Yeah,
But the trauma can
absolutely.
happen anywhere outside of
Oh,
my,
yeah.
it could happen at school, and so I don't know, just making parents more aware of what the options are out there, I think
Hmm.
it empowers them and gives them the ability
Absolutely.
to get their kids help.
Because I mean, I know like with all the parents that I do work with or have worked with, like I know like in like basically the foundation of their heart towards their kids is I just want to protect them. I just want
Yeah.
to make sure they do well and I raise a child who is happy and healthy. And I think that there is like some misconception of like if I like start to like dig into this or like open up about it, then that like opens us up for like much more.
Yeah.
And I think that it's one of the things that why trauma still carries the stigma of like, well, if I talk about it, then people are gonna be shameful of me, or try and shame me towards like what happened. And like you said, like trauma can happen anywhere on a Tuesday, at the
Yeah.
mall, like at home, like school, wherever.
Yeah.
And so it's not so much that like you've done anything wrong. It's just now it's worth unpacking.
Right. Right. Yeah. And a lot of this trauma is out of our control, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah,
So, and there is still
yeah.
so much shame behind having any kind of trauma. And it took me years to be able to talk about the things that I talk about now. It took me years because there was just so much shame behind it. So as an adult, you were diagnosed, you said at 30 with ADHD.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so what were the steps? What do you do for yourself to help regulate yourself, to help work? Because I know that there's medication in that, but there's also things that you can do without medication or I don't know what they did that for my son. There's different things that you can do
Yeah.
to help manage it, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there was another like teaching or a class that I went through, and I even like found this out through my own therapist and through my own study of like ADHD because I was suspicious before 30 about ADHD,
Yeah,
but To get a diagnosis as an adult is pretty extensive and kind of difficult and can be kind of expensive. So
Wow. Really?
uh, now it's like getting better. But if you don't have like insurance, or if you have like insurance, it's just kind of like there in case of emergencies. I
Oh
think it
yeah.
can be upwards of like $3,000 to $5,000.
That's
Um,
ridiculous.
yeah. And a lot of it is because of the lobbying that's been done by the mental health professionals that, and I don't disagree with this, but I don't agree with it either, that only like certain individuals can diagnose, like psychologists and psychiatrists and things like
Okay.
that. And I definitely see where it comes from because there are MDs and there are really sensitive medications that go into
Yeah.
management.
Yeah.
And so I don't disagree with that, but I also think that there's room for like other mental health professionals who are a little bit more accessible to be able to provide diagnoses.
Yeah.
Um, but to go back to your question of like how I manage mine is
No, this is
I
great
typically
information
like,
though.
yeah, I typically ask myself and like ask my clients to identify like one of two pathways. Because ADHD can look a lot like anxiety and irritable and shut down and I'm awful, I can't do
Mhm.
this. And so I asked myself one of two things, like, am I having a sensory need or am I having like an emotional need? Because ADHD also walks a pretty like close line with autism as well. Um, and so that means that we're constantly taking in stimulus. And so if I'm
Oh.
like overwhelmed or being irritable or grumpy or whatever, a lot of times I just need to like go into my bedroom for a second and like bed rot. Or maybe I need to go outside and just like let the sunshine hit me for a second and
Mhm.
just be quiet. Sometimes I've been too quiet for too long and I get antsy. And we have to like find ways to like get the mind going. So, is this like a sensory need? And if not, what am I like? What is the irritability? What is like the low self worth actually like trying to communicate with me? Like, what's the emotional need that I'm like not getting met?
Mhm.
Did someone say something to me 3 days ago that I completely didn't even process until now? And now I'm like upset about it.
Yeah.
Um, or like did something happen and I just thought like it was a big deal at that point, and then I've been sitting with it because ADHDers, we tend to have either um, largely under responsive or over responsive
Hmm.
reaction or emotional reactions to things. So we either like don't pick up on it or we pick up on it so much that we're like so angry and it's out of proportion.
Mm.
um, and so typically what I would tell, anyone who's listening or myself is it's top down. Can I do a skill? Can I do something? Can I check in on my emotional needs? Or can I go bottom up? What are my sensory needs? What's going on in my body? How can I care for my physical body? Like what's going on?
Yeah. 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 It's interesting because you were saying, um, there's something you were saying earlier that was interesting because it made me think of it. I can see because some of the things that you're mentioning are some of the same things that happen in trauma. So when you're talking about when you get, you overreact on stuff or you tune it out, that is something that I've done. Like that's what happens when I'm triggered. It's over
Oh
the
yeah,
top. It's
100%.
totally over the
Yeah.
top. I go from 0 to 100. So I can see why, again, what we were talking about, the overlapping symptoms of why it would be hard to diagnose whether it's
Mhm.
ADHD or it's trauma, because so many of what you
Oh
were
yeah,
saying
absolutely.
overlaps.
Yeah. And because I will like ask because I have a lot of clients who will come to me and, a lot of my big questions are like, what did you run into this week that you emotionally like didn't like or like caused like a big feeling to kind of come up? And I'll ask, they'll tell me, I got really angry, I got really sad, I shut down, I dissociated, whatever. And all of those go within PTSD and ADHD.
Yeah.
And I'll, ask, did anything happen? And sometimes they'll tell me yes, or sometimes they have no idea. Um, but the people who come to see me all have PTSD. And 95% of the people who come to see me also have ADHD.
Mm.
And so sometimes we kind of have to leave behind like how important is it to identify like what the specific trigger was,
You're right.
and really just kind of like landmark our physical reactions and like how to soothe from there. It's
Right.
important to know like what triggers you, but sometimes we're just having like an ADHD moment and rubber stimulated,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
sometimes both.
Yeah. The most important thing is you need to regulate yourself. You need to get yourself calmed down and get yourself into a calm state, because that's really frustrating. I know, and I've described it on on the podcast before, just talking about when you get triggered and just, the craziness that goes on in your head, the stuff that goes on in your body, how I want to react is so over the top. It's so over the top. And until I had self-awareness of that, and that's one of the things that you're kind of describing that is really important for you, is the self-awareness, because that's how you're gonna catch the stuff. You're gonna catch the emotions, the feelings, and what's going on in your body. But I can remember, and still, at least now I can catch my triggers. I can catch when I'm triggered. I know a lot of what triggers me, but sometimes things come up that out of the blue. But at least I'm aware of the trigger and I don't go down that path anymore. But I do have things to help me calm myself down and regulate again, because that's a really frustrating feeling. And when you aren't aware of that's what's going on, it's it's frightening, because you're going over the top and you see yourself going over the top, and sometimes you'll even recognize that you're over the top, but you can't stop it.
Yeah, there's no breaks. Absolutely.
And you're sitting here going, I'm going through these motions like I'm not even controlling myself, like I have no control over myself whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like you're just like watching yourself, take the train off the rails. And something
Yeah.
like I think that's like really important to note is why it's so important to identify like your triggers, like whether you have ADHD or not. If you do have PTSD and or if you just have ADHD, wherever you are like in your journey, it's so important to learn to regulate, because those of us with ADHD are far more likely to be re-traumatized,
Oh yeah.
to be reassaulted. We're far more likely to suffer from substance abuse issues. We're far more likely to be homeless. We're far more likely to just have like a lower outlook on life. And I won't say that like this is not like a victim blaming concept, but there are some times where we can just watch ourselves be so dysregulated and we don't know how to regulate,
Mm-hmm.
that we kind of sometimes like get ourselves in situations that like re-abuse us, like
Right.
re-traumatize us.
Punish us.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the
Mm-hmm.
hypersexuality or like the substance use or cutting people off or like the really big anger, like road rage, like
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's not something that people without ADHD do, like
Yeah.
it is something that it's just important, whether or not you're ready to like go into like your PTSD journey. It is just important to regulate yourself or learn how to, so we don't re-traumatize ourselves. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why it's important for parents to know that too. But on the bright side, we're also more likely to be entrepreneurs, own our own businesses. We're typically like the world changers, the society changers.
Really
We have
intelligent.
like
I know that
yeah,
ADHD, they're highly intelligent. Mm-hmm.
yeah. So I mean, it's just all on like how we learn how to like regulate both the PTSD and the ADHD and why it's so important.
I said this to my son when he was little, when we were trying to we were getting him diagnosed, and he felt bad. He was struggling, and
Mm-hmm.
and what he didn't say this, but what came to my mind is I was worried about him thinking that he was different than other kids, right?
Right.
Because that's really, I could see that. I could see how they would feel different than the other kids. And I just explained to him, I said, honey, this is your area of struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has areas of struggle. And in school, you're great in math, you're great in reading and writing, you're English. This is your struggle. You're no different than anybody else. Another kid in your class maybe can't read as well as you do. Maybe another kid
Yeah.
can't do math as well. So it's just your struggle. So I wasn't trying to downplay it, but I was trying to put it into perspective, because that's the truth. It's just that is what
Absolutely.
the cards you got dealt, unfortunately. And so
Yeah.
the good news is there are ways to manage it and live with it and understand it. Like you did, you dive deep into the research to figure it out and understand it. And so that's what the truth is. That's your struggle. And so for me, it's my childhood abuse and I've had to learn to
Mm-hmm.
manage it. Sometimes it gets away from me and manages me, and then I have to bring it back around
Around. Yeah.
and clean up the mess that I just did.
Yeah.
Hopefully I didn't, but
Honestly, yeah. I mean, healing is lifelong.
yeah.
We can like think that we have like all of our triggers identified, and it's no secret to any of us. Like the world changes every day,
Yeah.
and it's just making sure that we do the work, that we're like we don't dislike ourselves or hate ourselves for being triggered or
Yes.
re-triggered, or some stuff we could have dealt with forever ago and it comes back up. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean a failure. It just means it's an unmet need.
Right, right, right. Exactly. I know it's that's a really good point is we need to give ourselves a lot of grace. We need to give ourselves, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, because if you think about it, would you treat, someone else like that? Would you be that hard on them? Would you call them out
Right.
if they, no, you would have some empathy and compassion for them and you'd want to support them. And so that's what we need to do with ourselves. I'm still learning that. I've come a long, long way, but I'm still working on that because I still get really mad at myself sometimes. But I have to bring it
Yeah.
into perspective too, and I have to be careful with that because it's really easy to go down that beat yourself up road, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to do that. So why don't you share with the listeners how some things that that some people that may think that they have ADHD or they're dealing with trauma. So we talked about some of things that you the things that you do to help regulate yourself and to help
Yeah.
stepping outside, because that's one thing I'll do. I definitely will go outside, walk around, get the sun in my face. I'll
It's
go
so
play with our
nice.
dogs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go and I'll go for a walk, and I love looking at the flowers and the trees and stuff. But I know there's there's breathing exercises. What are some other things
Mm-hmm.
that they can do?
So I think that's really kind of like this is going to be like person specific, and I think it's really number one. I'm going to say I want you to try as many skills as possible. Like literally, just Google like skills to like for self regulation and try as many as you can find. And the reason why I want you to do that is because you're going to find skills that you really, really love and that you
Mm-hmm.
really, really hate. And what people tend to do is when they like a therapist like well intentioned will give them like 3 to 5 skills and like none of them work. And it's not because you're not trying hard enough or that you're failing at therapy, it's because they're not for you. And
Right.
so what I kind of like say to people is like trauma therapy or therapy in general is just like a lot of data points and data collection. So I would tell you go Google as many as you can physically find. But I would also say is try and find something that engages like all of your senses. So there's like, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1,
Yeah.
5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can hear, touch, smell, and taste.
Yeah.
Um, I really love things that are like really immediate and abrupt. Like I will tell people to go put their hands in their cold water for five
Explain
minutes or until it's
explain
physically
that.
uncomfortable.
Because that one's really interesting, and I know that one it works. But explain the I don't know the science behind it, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So humans are really sensitive to water, and that's why like so many of us like really, really love it, or like we could just take it or leave it, and we'd prefer not to. And our physical body is designed to be like really sensitive to water. So you can even, I think there's studies like if you just like rub water on your temples, like your body temperature starts to decrease, like just from
Ooh,
your temples. Yeah.
I like
And
that.
so if there's, yeah, I've tried it a few times. It works on a hot day when you're just, nothing's going right and you can't find your
Nice.
keys. Um, uh, because they're not in the handy dandy ADHD spot that you put them in.
Yep. Yep.
Um, so the reason why water works so well for the body, and I'll tell people like go take a shower, put your hand under
Mm,
water, put water right here, is because our nervous system will immediately orient to any water, and value that as like the number one predator or threat right now. Um, because before whatever we're feeling, stress, anxiety, crying, we're assessing that as a threat. Like that's why we're like emotionally reacting to it. Um,
ah,
Once water is in the picture, because we don't want to drown, the brain will reassess that and just monitor like where the water's going,
and takes
and
care of.
it'll put all of your attention. It'll take all of your attention to that water, and it starts to physically change like your physiological reactions, like your body temperature, your heart rate, things like that, where the water kind of like does the work for you.
I've never had anybody explain it like that, and it completely makes sense. I mean, I've had explained. I know that is important for grounding is putting your hands in water and letting the cool water run over it, and paying attention to the feel of the water, the coolness,
Mhm.
and everything. I know that, and that's the way I've had it explained. But that completely, you went behind the scenes and told us the science of it, which is really interesting, and that makes sense. It kind of snaps your. It's kind of, it sounds kind of funny, but it's like our border collies. They get very
Yeah, like,
fixated.
oh, like,
Yeah,
yeah.
they get very fixated on something, and we have to do something to kind of snap them out of it, kind of. So
Hmm.
that's kind of the same
Absolutely.
kind of idea. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so I tend to like tell people start with sensory first. We can all like want to have like better like self-talk or be able to like verbally like self-regulate, but the brain, if you have ADHD and or PTSD or both, your brain's not going to listen to it at all. It's in fight or flight mode.
Yeah.
So find skills or things that deal with the senses. So like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, the water, going and like letting like the sunshine hit you, go for a run because you have to physiologically like react to that, or go for a walk. I don't run.
Or even
Um,
dance, right? Because the
Anything,
movement,
yeah,
dance, wiggle, whatever, move around, get.
absolutely,
Hmm.
yeah. Or even like I have some people, they have like a pillow that they punch, that they
Yeah.
scream into, and do anything that engages like your sensory out, like input and output. Start there before you even try and redirect like any sort of like negative or positive self-talk.
Because really what you need to do is you need to get yourself calmed down first.
Mhm.
Because if you think about it, your body is in flight mode, fight or flight mode, right? And I know what that's like being on in survival mode. It's up
Mhm.
there. And imagine when somebody's really upset and you're trying to talk sense to them, right? It doesn't work.
Yeah,
You
they're
have to get
not
them
hearing you.
calmed
There's no
down,
point.
right?
Yeah.
Because everything's going crazy. Your brain's going crazy, your body's going crazy. So you have to get everything calmed down so that they can now focus, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like telling someone like in the middle of a house fire, like, well, it's fine. Like insurance will come and assess the damage. Like, we're not thinking about that, like
No,
maybe
no, no.
tomorrow, but
Yeah, yeah, not today. No, yeah.
right.
Interesting. Yeah. So those are good. Those are really good tips because I'm actually rewriting my workshop, and I've actually been kind of going over this and trying to. I'm going to give the ladies techniques like this, like grounding, like self-awareness techniques, and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 was one that came up a lot,
Hmm.
as well as
Yeah.
the water. But they didn't explain it like that. I mean, I know that the water works, but I've never had anybody explain the science behind it and how it snaps you out of it. It's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And even like with the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I will say if you're gonna try it, there's no like wrong way to do therapy, right? But and there's no wrong way to try and like self-regulate, but there is like a best practice. And with 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I don't think that this additional instruction is given enough of like take your time with it. Like if you're looking for 5 things that you can see, don't like panic like look around the room for just name
Yeah.
5 things. Like challenge yourself to find like 5 like purple things or 5 things like with a similar texture. Because the reason why like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 works when it's used appropriately is because again, like we're reorienting away from the danger of like whatever trigger, and we're orienting like back into our environment. But if we do it like really panicked and like we're like
Yeah.
crazy, like smelling candles like a crazy person, as many as we can find, or like, rummaging through our pantry, that's not like slowing down anything about like
Yeah.
our
You're just taking
physical
that
being.
energy
Yeah.
into the exercise. And so it's not going to
Hmm.
bring you down. So let's go into that though. Let's talk about the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 because I did read about it just before we got on here. It's so funny.
Oh,
Yeah. And so we know the reason behind it is again to help you calm down because what I read, you're right. They didn't say that. They didn't say it doing it in a calm fashion. And that's I could totally see myself doing that. Looking right away for 5 things and right away, because I want to hurry up and get myself calmed down, right? So if I hurry up
mhm.
and do the exercise, then I'll calm down, which is wrong. So tell us how the proper way to do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and exactly what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's okay to be walking. It's okay to be pacing. It's okay to be anxious, like when you're doing this, or be triggered, or be upset or angry. But the I guess like if I were to say like at least like align yourself with the want to regulate of like, I feel really angry, I feel really anxious, but I'm going to intentionally like slow myself down. And so like for sight, I mean, we have like wide peripherals. We can find 5 things. Just I can look at you and I can name 5 things now.
Right.
So I kind of like challenge like my clients and myself even of like I said, like find things that like a similar color or like that similar category. Or if like if you're in a home, like make yourself walk into 5 different rooms and identify something, in each room. The 4 things that you can touch, again, like challenge yourself of like, I'm going to find 4 different things that have different textures. I can touch like a really soft blanket, but then I can go into my bathroom and touch like my really cold, like hard sink, and just really challenge yourself for 4 different textures. Things that you can hear. This is where I love to like tell people, go for a walk or go into like a different part of your room, like where maybe you can hear your dog snoring in one room, but you hear like the TV echo like in another, and they're completely like different things. The things that you could smell. It's really easy to go for a candle, but like challenge yourself. Like, do you have houseplants? Do you have a candle? Do you have something like a laundry detergent or like your favorite sweater that just always smells good? And because you're reorienting back into the environment that you're comfortable in. And the final thing, the one thing that you can taste, I would say to have it either like really like sour, extremely sweet, or kind of spicy. Like have it be to where like you have to pay attention to it.
Right.
Because again, that's just going to pull you like back out of your body and into your environment. So, there's no wrong way to do it, but I think that is like the best practice to do
the best practice where you're going to get the best benefit from it. But it makes sense because, and the whole idea is when you're doing these exercises, when you're looking for the 5 things, that is what your focus is. That's what you're looking at. And so it gets your brain off of all the danger and scary stuff that's going on. But it also, what I have found that it does, it brings you completely present. You're really in the present moment. And that's important to be in that present moment. Because I'll tell you, it was funny. I didn't want to interrupt you, but when you were talking about, going for a walk, and I'm thinking, what I used to do? Okay, I'm going to go for a walk. And I would just be on this mission, but I'm not slowing down. I'm not looking at anything. I'm not enjoying anything. I'm getting that walk done, So I come back and I'm still irregulated because I didn't calm myself down. I mean, I got exercise. I probably got a really good, little workout there, but I didn't like slow down. And that's one thing I've had to work on myself is I get in this work mode and like nothing else matters.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
That becomes my focus. And then I let things go that I should be paying attention to.
Absolutely. And again, I can come from chicken or the egg ADHD or PTSD, because with ADHD, like it's kind of like almost like a manic episode that we kind of go into with like the high energy and like the hyperfixation. But even like when we're looking at PTSD, if we really think about like what trauma is, like sometimes trauma happens like really quickly, or oftentimes like trauma happens quickly, or like our life becomes threatened quickly, and we have to make choices or move quickly. Like the sexual abuse, like you have to get out of it. Like once, unfortunately, it's done, like you are getting out of there.
Yeah.
Or the sexual abuse has happened out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Or like a car accident, a natural disaster, or like, physical assault, like all those things happen in a really quick manner. And so when we get triggered or we're fighting, like, that want to just go, 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 and like not really slow down. I mean, you have to ask yourself too, like, are you also fighting like that PTSD trigger because it happens so fast?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Cause that's true. And I am aware, and for years I was aware of it, but I just thought, well, that's just me, and now I'm realizing, no. Like I'm trying to be present in everything I do. I'm not there yet, but including when I'm working, because I'll sit here and I'll start working, and then it's like hours go by. I literally have to set an alarm, because it's like, oh, well, I just want to get this done. I'll do the other stuff that I need to do later. And so I literally have to set an alarm so that I stop and take a break, even to get up and just get away from it, go outside, walk around, play with the dogs, take a break, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how you get in that mode. And that is ADHD brain, and that's trauma brain too. You just get hyper focused on something.
Well, yeah, because if you like look at it, like we can get irritable, right? Like if we don't
Oh
finish the
yeah.
thing that we wanted to finish,
Oh
and
yeah.
that's just like a sensory need, right? But if we also, I mean, again, chicken and egg of like, why am I getting irritable? Like, do I think that I'm going to get in trouble? Do I think I'm
I
going to get yelled
know.
at? Do I think I'm going to get hit? Like, and like logic takes over quickly. Like, no, I'm fine. I'm going to do
Yeah.
this. But our body remembers differently.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. If you're right. If you stop and you slow down, why am I feeling like this? Because, and I think, my instant thing is, yeah, I'm going to get in trouble for not getting this stuff done. That is
Mm-hmm.
definitely still a back here kind of trigger for me is, oh no, I got to get it done. I got to get it done so I don't get in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. So then,
Interesting.
like, that's the question, right? Like, is it ADHD or PTSD?
I know,
Which
right?
is, which is like such a complicated question, and I think it is like so frustrating that it's not included. But yeah, like, and even like it can be both or neither or whatever. But just asking yourself the question of why do I feel that way can take you a really long way.
It's empowering when you
Mm-hmm.
are able to start using these tools and you are slowing that train down and you're able to manage it. It is so empowering. I mean, just the stuff that I've learned over the last 10 years about trauma has been so empowering because so much of this, I thought I was crazy. I thought it was me. I thought there was something wrong with
Yeah,
me, right?
yeah,
And I'm certainly not going to share that with anybody because then they'll know that I'm crazy or they'll know there's something
right,
wrong with me, right? So
right. Can't
don't
let the
say
secret
anything.
out.
Yeah, don't let the secret out at all. But then, as I've learned about stuff, and now I put my stuff out there because I want other people to realize we're all in this. We're all dealing
Mhm.
with this. You're not somebody that's weird or different than anybody else, and it's empowering to know that, okay, that's what it is. Oh, and there's a way that we can work with it so that it's no longer controlling me anymore. That is what has been
Absolutely.
huge for me, and I'm sure for you.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm so glad to hear that you've like found that because it is empowering and it's nice to like not be the problem in our own mind. And I'm sure that's been like really relieving in a lot of aspects for you.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, this has been really enlightening. You've really given some insight
Well,
into
thank you.
both worlds, and and they are very similar. And there's so many similarities on how to manage it.
Hmm. Yeah, and so that's why, like, if you do find yourself like getting curious about an ADHD diagnosis, but it's just like not available to you at the moment, really do some reflection on like if there is trauma in your background. And again, like there are just many similarities on how to manage these symptoms that you can still find like a healing pathway, a regulated pathway, even like without a diagnosis. Of course, you need a diagnosis for like medication management,
Right,
but you can at least like find some relief without it.
right.
And you're like worth doing that relief work on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, if our audience wanted to reach out to you, how would they reach out? How would they catch you? How would they contact you? I can talk, really, I can.
You did a great job so far. So
Until now.
I do have I do have my website, thecozycouchcounseling.com. I am on Instagram and Facebook. Facebook is the Cozy Couch Counseling and Consultation. Um, Instagram is at the Cozy Couch Counseling. Um, I cannot like field like any sort of messages about like what you should or shouldn't do like therapeutically or like any like suicide or self-harm things. You will be referred out to like your closest like support system. But if you are like more curious about like, you know, what you should do to like seek a diagnosis or like if certain skills are helpful or what you should bring up to like your therapist, like how do you want to bring it up to your therapist? I'm more than happy to sit with that. If you're in the state of Georgia and you want to work with me, I'm more than happy to talk with you about that. But yeah, you can find me on those three pathways.
Nice. And one last question. What do you want to leave our listeners with?
I hope that everyone walks away with a little bit more self awareness that creates just this crazy level of self compassion for yourself.
Yeah.
You're not the problem. You are not wrong. You're not lazy. You're not unmotivated. You are living in a world that happens really fast, trauma or not. And you cannot hate yourself into self-love. Love is only created from love. And so we cannot punish ourselves or hate ourselves to the point where we reach who we want to be. We have to practice being nice before we get to that person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this has been really powerful. It's been great. And thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your
Thank you.
story and really giving a lot of clarity between and confusion, right? Because they are so similar, ADHD and trauma, but you've really given a lot of clarity, and at least, there are similarities, but there are ways that we can manage it too.
Well, thank you for having me. It's really like great work that you're doing. I think that your podcast is just amazing.
Thank you.
And I think it's the pioneers who start asking the questions and like kind of demanding like that research be done, or at least people talk about it.
Yeah.
Is really what makes like world change. So I appreciate your time with me today.
Oh, thank you. It's been great.